From a self-contradictory mess split between equal parts physical bruiser and cheesy mage to what I consider the pioneer of the visual gameplay update project, Sion began his newfound career rather quiet all things considered. Following the initial spike in popularity from his VGU, Sion remained mostly a gimmicky tank juggernaut hybrid up in top lane, where he would occasionally see play throughout tank meta but not have as much market share as other dominating tanks during this time. He would experience a comparable resurgence during the early part of Season 8 and for most of it at that, before receiving significant nerfs later that year that would push him back down to obscurity. But from 2020 onwards, Sion has been gradually creeping back up in play rate, which I would partially hold Vars responsible for as the new top streamer in League of Legends right now for his patented Sion gameplay, much to the entertainment of us, the audience, but to the dismay of those he plays with and against, I'm sure. Nevertheless, Sion went from an edge case to a near constant presence in top lane, and he's gradually developed an infamous reputation throughout the League community for being a champion with a viable strategy of unironically intent feeding to garner advantage, an experience that, as you can guess, may not necessarily be healthy for the game in light of going against all preconceived notions of winning the game. So for this episode of Everything Wrong With, we're going to be featuring the undead juggernaut Sion and talk about how his gameplay became so problematic despite having a fairly well-designed moveset. Regarding said moveset, I want to open with a disclaimer that I stand by my statements in previous videos on Sion that he's a well-designed champion on paper. The idea of intentionally designing a champion to be clunky and stagger with the moves in exchange for overwhelming raw strength is ambitious, but really sells that raid boss experience, highlighting his narrative significance. I mean, heck, in the Awaken music video, he's like 2 stories tall when standing in front of Irelia. The man is chonky. That being said, I think I speak for many of us when I say I'm not particularly fond of the way he's evolved over time. Not that he's public enemy #1 or anything. Many of you probably expected to find another 200 years champion next in line for this series, but it's because of how differently he's escalated to be an issue that made me believe he might be a good candidate for Everything Wrong With. At his core, Sion's a hybrid between a Vanguard and Juggernaut. He possesses the sheer durability and engage potential of the former while carrying enough damage and threat capacity of the latter to where you can't just ignore him for the entirety of a fight and go after the backline. Underestimate his damage and it will cost you dearly. The premise of Sion is that of being the raid boss to end all raid bosses. He's the first one into a fight and forces you to target and finish him down before you so much as think about going for anyone else. And in true raid boss fashion, he's designed to force you into a lose-lose situation, where the enemy team doesn't want to burn more resources than they can afford in order to take him down, but if they don't, he'll take them down. The only difference between Sion and other raid bosses like Aatrox and Mordekaiser is that he underscores that catch 2022 to the utmost extreme. Coupled with the circumstantial evolution of League systems, and we have the frankly degenerate champion that Sion is today. To account for most of his abilities coming with some kind of delay or unwieldiness, Sion's kit has incredible, almost excessive payoff in the off chance those abilities do connect, beginning with his passive when Sion takes fatal damage. After a 1.5 second delay, he recovers to full health that rapidly and progressively deteriorates over time until it reaches 0. While in this state, he gains a myriad of benefits. 1.75 fixed attack speed, 100% lifesteal, making it so if he does 100 damage, he heals 100 damage, 10% bonus max out damage on hit, and a fairly sizable movement speed buff for a couple seconds, which is obviously intended to help him get close to his target of interest. Glory in Death was once his least impactful ability during the early days following his rework. You might be lucky to get a few hits here and there, but generally, the enemy team wasn't all that intimidated by it and would just move on to the next opponent. Nowadays, however, with how much extra health Sion can accumulate, he can remain in this state for upwards of a dozen seconds provided he's attacking something, making him ironically more scary when he's dead than when he's actually alive. So Glory in Death went from being an unconventional, kind of impractical revive passive to one of the most threatening depending on if the enemy team had ways to peel him off them or not. The rest of his abilities all have that clunky but humongous payoff aspect as well. At the time of writing this, Decimating Smash can cap out at 350 base plus a whopping 225% total AD over a massive area, accompanied by a 1 second knockup and a 1 1/4 seconds then after for 2.25 seconds of interruption altogether. Considering this has the potential to easily damage all 5 members of the enemy team, provided you're somehow able to get the full channel off, a single cast of Decimating Smash deals more damage than some champions' ultimates, which is pretty insane given its extremely low mana cost and short cooldown. Mind you, you can easily count the number of times you've seen a Sion land a 5-man full charged Q on one hand, but the opportunity is there. Soul Furnace is another ability with incredible strength under the condition you can pull it off. Passively, it grants bonus health whenever he kills an enemy that lasts until the end of time. The said passive conveniently synergizes with the active, granting him a long-lasting shield equal to a portion of his max health, which can be recast after 3 seconds if the shield holds to explode and deal % health damage in a wide radius around him. The caveat here is, of course, if you can maintain the shield for 3 seconds to get off that explosion, which does a non-negligible amount of damage at that. Many players forget that Sion's W hurts just as much, if not more, than his Q. I know I haven't covered his Sion ultimate, but I don't want to make this feel like a champion spotlight, so let's cut right to the chase. Sion's kit in a vacuum is fairly designed. These abilities all have the potential to achieve devastating results in combat in the hands of the right player, making him one of the more skill-expressive tanks as opposed to Malphite, who doesn't really take much execution to reach his maximum effect. So what's the issue here? The issue here isn't so much the champion himself, instead how the game has changed over the years to throw off the internal balance of its abilities. To be perfectly blunt, Sion is in a terrible position right now, not in terms of strength, but in terms of experience. While the risk of this happening has always been a thing, it wasn't until around Season 10 when Sion's gameplay went from being a creative, albeit clunky raid boss to a champion who can get away with dumb mistakes and in some cases actually wants to make those dumb mistakes. Being an infinite scaler, Sion naturally grows stronger over time courtesy of his W passive, but unlike other infinite scalers who are quite vulnerable in the early game, Sion actually doesn't have that bad of a laning phase. During the first 15 minutes of a game, you'll conceivably only be fighting one person, not 5. That's 4 less champions who can interrupt your Q, break your W shield, etc. Furthermore, people have longer cooldowns and less overall combat mobility and tempo, making them easier to hit. So while Sion doesn't have that much durability in the early game, the enemy doesn't have that many options to deal with his moveset. Basically, depending on the matchup, Sion can be a veritable lane bully, but even so, most top laners can easily fight and shut him down before he gets a chance to scale. The issue is that over the years, with the average game accelerating at a breakneck pace, infinite scalers have received proportional compensation. Nasus Q stacks a lot faster now compared to back in the day. I think 5 or so years ago you wanted 300 stacks in 20 minutes, now you can get 400 or 500 easily. Veigar also gets more AP, stuff like that. On relaunch, Sion's W used to give only 2 HP per minion and 10 for large minions or champs. Today, he gets 4 HP per minion, which is double, and 15 for large minions or champs, which is 1.5 times. That's a measurably faster rate of accumulating health. Now, while faster scaling is always appreciated, infinite scalers are still kept in check by the need to interact to stack up, enabling experienced players to keep them shut down by preventing them from doing so. Sion, on the other hand, has some semblance of a workaround. His passive. If he dies, you get at least 5 seconds to do whatever the hell you want with no negative consequence, since you're dead, so players can free farm minions at no extra cost. What's their lane opponent gonna do about it? Kill them again? This allows Sion to stack up his infinite scaling passive more easily than the likes of Nasus, Veigar, and Thresh, who have to be alive to pull this off. The thing is, at a certain point, Sion's gold value accumulation from his passive begins to exceed the amount of gold he forfeits to his opponent by dying. 1 HP is equal to 2.67 gold. A standard minion wave gives Sion 24 health or 64 gold, increased to 39 health if it's a cannon wave, or 104.13. But then you have to remember that bonus health increases the shield value of his W and the average duration of his passive. So Cannon Wave gives you more than just 104.13 gold in stats, it gives more shield value, which is effectively more HP, and more passive duration, which, funnily enough, can allow you to survive longer to get more minions. The consequence of death, aside from giving the enemy champion gold and experience, is that you also lose gold and experience from minions, making it so one solo kill can sometimes cost you 5, 6, 7, or even 800 gold, and a full level depending on how many minions you lose. Sion, however, can still salvage that minion gold and experience via his passive. This is the fundamental basis for why Inting Sion works. He can still generate gold value through his W passive, and on the off chance he manages to score a kill, he can get extra gold, especially given that if he's Inting to you, he's giving you a shutdown bounty. Shutdowns have been changed over the years to give more payout. Back then, shutdowns used to only cap out at, I think, 500 gold for a kill. Then for a time, shutdown gold was distributed across the entire team. But now, shutdowns can make a champion worth more than triple the gold of a regular kill, capping out at 1000. Ordinarily, shutting down someone with a 700 gold bounty by yourself requires them to heavily misplay, as the disparity in gold and subsequent items and whatnot makes it almost impossible for you to fight them on your own. But with Sion's W passive, he can still fairly keep up in gold value to still pose a threat to you, and even if he doesn't, he can always just proxy farm. When he's 0-5, he's not even worth the hassle it takes to fight him. And if you do, he's guaranteed to get the wave anyway, so what's the point? A long time ago, that didn't matter as much because Sion's W could only generate at most like 500 health by 20 minutes. Now, however, with good CS per minute, it's not unusual for Sion to accumulate over 1000 bonus health. That's 2670 gold in value just by existing, and unlike Veigar's ability power or Nasus' Q damage, health is a far more universally applicable stat. Staying alive longer allows you to deal more damage and go through more rotations of abilities, so by being tankier, Sion gets more damage too. Alternatively, now that he gets so much extra health from W, he can afford to build damage items to abuse his massive AD ratios on Q and ultimate, while still being reasonably tanky. Where just that, it may not be that big of a problem. Nearly everyone in this day and age has tank busting options either through their own merit or through items. Sion can have 20,000 health for all the difference it makes, but just as there are now plenty of ways to damage tanks, there are now plenty of ways for tanks to exert pressure without having to build DPS items. The Mythic item system and item system overhaul from seasons 11 through 13 were the tipping point of this in my opinion, because it presented tanks with so many ways to turn their durability into offense. Prior to the Mythic item change, Titanic Hydra would cause all attacks to deal bonus damage equal to the user's max health in a cone and on the active. But in Season 11, though it lost the active component, it was given a second passive to increase the wielder's attack damage based on their max health, which got changed to bonus health in version 11.8, making Sion's W even more rewarding since the accumulated health from Soul Furnace counts as bonus health. Sion could effortlessly get over 100 bonus AD from Titanic Hydra towards mid to late game. Titanic Hydra used to be a pretty bad item on Sion, as he was more of an ability caster, not an auto attacker, but now, this item gives him bonus damage on autos and bonus AD altogether. Another item that amplified the strength of his W is of course Heartsteel, further increasing how much health he can accumulate over time and boosting the proc damage of Heartsteel to where the item alone can easily do like 800 damage with a single auto. The W stacking would increase the damage of Heartsteel and the permanent bonus health, which would then increase the damage of Titanic Hydra, Grasp of the Undying and whatnot, and it would just snowball on top of one another. The next item is of course Hullbreaker. Hullbreaker doesn't explicitly scale off bonus health, but what it does is make each of Sion's attacks against towers hurt that much more, and with how tanky he is, he's guaranteed to get chip damage off on towers, especially while dead. Taking into account the huge amount of armor and magic resist you get from the item, and he becomes virtually indestructible. All of this extra health would then allow Sion to be indisputably the biggest abuser of the rune Demolish, causing you to deal bonus damage to towers equal to a portion of your max health, and with Sion having easily like 7,000 health by 30 minutes, that's over 2,400 bonus damage to towers per use of Demolish, not to mention the 400 or so bonus attack damage he has at this point. The best way to stop someone from using Demolish is to pressure them away from your tower, but how are you going to be able to do that against a tank with over 7,000 health? He can use W, give himself like a 1000 HP shield, walk up, auto, and then just walk away without ever noticing he took damage. And let's not forget, even if you do manage to kill him for attempting to, Glory and Death forces you to try to kill him again within 3 seconds before he sets off Demolished. This is why they greatly reduce his tower damage while dead mid-season 12. Sion could not be stopped. It wasn't just the upgrades to Sion's W passive that made him snowball out of control, it was the items and runes that still enabled him to exert massive pressure on the game just from last-hitting minions and auto-attacking champions. Back in Season 5, Sion would only have 500 to 700 more health than other tanks at 30 minutes. Nowadays, a Sion would have 3,000 more health than other tanks. Towards the late game, Glory and Death would allow him to stay alive for an insanely long time since the health degradation is a flat amount, and they actually increase the rate of that decay in 13.9, but when you have 8,000 health, you're basically not noticing the difference. Remember when I mentioned at the beginning of the video that the goal of a raid boss is to put you in a catch-22 where you don't want to waste all your resources trying to shut them down since you need some in reserve for the rest of their team, but if you don't focus them, they can and will destroy you? That is Sion, only to the absolute infinity. If the enemy team picks Sion and your team doesn't have an absurd amount of tank busting champions or a response to Hullbreaker's side lane, you have to end the game within 25 minutes. Otherwise, it's only a matter of time before he just backdoors your entire base. What kept Sion in check was that reaching his optimal pressure was extremely challenging. The changes made to him, his items, and build took that challenge away. In other words, they made that pressure not a question of if, but when. Sion is the ultimate matchup in team comp check. If you have tank busting and side lane pressure to counter his massive health scaling and split pushing, you should be fine. If you don't, pray with all of your soul that you win in 25 minutes. If the Sion player is good, and fortunately for us, 90% of Sion players are terrible, the game is lost before you even get past champ select. That is what's wrong with Sion right now. Unlike the previous episodes, he's a well-designed champion, but circumstantially, he's reached the point where he can trap you in a lose-lose situation no matter what you try to do and stop him. So that concludes everything wrong with Sion. Let me know your thoughts on the champion in the comments down below if you agree or disagree with my opinion of what his main problem is right now. But as always, if you enjoyed the video, I encourage you to leave a like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other Everything Wrong With videos if you haven't yet. Till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.